Welcome back to the Product Operations Summit. Before we get going with the next session, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this event to your screens. And don't forget, you can access even more content from exclusive articles and interviews to all past and future events on demand, as well as templates and frameworks by becoming a PLA member. Head on over to productledalliance.com for more info. Enjoy the next session.
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back, and for those of you just joining us, and welcome everyone. Our next fantastic session is about to commence on adventures in change management, and we have the fantastic Chris Compston here, Product Ops Principal at Farfetch. I know Chris, thanks to him contributing some wonderful Product Ops articles to the PLA blog channel, which you can check out as well. Please do feel free to drop any questions into the chat, and we will get to those. And also another little shameless plug for our State of Product Ops survey for the report, which I'll drop into the chat later on. Quick survey to fill out for you guys. But yeah, without further ado, welcome Chris.
Hello, thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, let's get the screen shared. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, welcome everyone, and thanks, Adam, for the lovely introduction. Fantastic. Chris Compston is here. I hope you've enjoyed the rest of the Product Ops Summit. We joined last year as well, and it was really fantastic, and it's great to continue this conversation around product operations. And as I've already seen on the agenda, there's already a couple of talks around change management, and I think, as a lot of you already know, a lot of product operations and change management definitely cross over, whether it's tackling kind of small best practice changes or taking on the kind of bigger, more complex, emerging kind of ideas and how to manage and prepare for that change. I'm going to be talking to you today about adventures in change management. So this is definitely not a talk. I'm going to be giving you a load of frameworks to follow. You can go and Google that yourselves. I'm going to be giving you some learnings that I found over the past 2.5 years of working at Farfetch and prior to that as well, to hopefully to interest you in change management and to kind of catalyze your education in this space as well. Just to start off with, as Adam's already introed me, I'm Chris. I work at Farfetch. I'm a product operations principal. Prior to that, I was working at ThoughtWorks and also at Sky TV. And even though I had various different roles in my past, there's one kind of core tenet to my career, and that's to help make better products and to help teams make better products. And that's really what I'm focused on through various means. And that's maybe looking at process efficiency and team capability and team happiness as well. If you do want to chat with me further, I am on Twitter, relatively active, let's say NDXCC. I also have a space where I write a number of articles, so feel free to take a look there. You'll probably see some of these on the PLL blog as well. I'll quickly promote that for Adam. So why am I talking about product operations? Well, why am I talking about change management in relation to product operations? Well, as you're probably aware, a lot of the work we do does cross over with change management. And we are kind of ideally placed in the organization to be thinking about how change happens. And we should be allowing our product development teams, cross-functional, hopefully, as they should be, to really be thinking about what they're working on versus the how that we focus on. I want to be really clear with this, because my view on product operations is not just that we focus on how versus what, the what being customer goals, solution ideas, alignment to strategy, what the business wants. But we should be thinking about the how in the sense that we look at the way that our teams operate, but we do not impose change to them. It should be co-collaboration. It should be co-creation. We should be showing people how to change and helping them through that, rather than beavering away in a room, focusing on new processes and then bring them out and saying, right, this is how we do things now, because things aren't going to land in that way. That's how I view product operations. Equally, and again, why it's so important that we think about change management is, I believe that product operations should be looking across the whole product development lifecycle. So that's right at the beginning, from understanding our customer, aligning to the business strategy, going through product discovery and experimentation, design, ideation, prioritizing the things we want to do, and then building and testing and learning from those things. Product operations is well placed, although it can be mentally draining to look at this whole product development lifecycle and all the various actors and players, cross-functional teams that are in this space. So we're able to identify change opportunities and possibilities, we're also able to identify problems or challenges that might need change moving into the future, but also to amplify the good. And that's something that is often missed, that there's teams out there that are doing fantastic work, that the only change that was required, that their good practices are actually spread to other teams and other areas of the business as well. So that's why I believe product operations is particularly well placed to think about change management and to be the drivers of change. But first, we have to understand what change actually means and why it's important to consider. And if you've been through any kind of change, any organization, whether you've been an implementer of it or it's happened to you or with you, it can often feel incredibly uncomfortable. And that's totally normal, because change is a constant and normal part of our lives. But the point is that people feel like they may have lost control through change. And I believe that product operations is, again, ideally placed to manage some of that change, in the sense that people that are in the teams or in the organization don't feel like control has been lost, or to actually minimize that risk of loss of control. It's really important to think about change because it is always happening. And if you've ever worked in any organizations that are scaling, or a consultancy that's maybe worked with various clients at different stages, what you'll realize is that organizations are always growing. They have to grow, because if they aren't growing, they're actually just shrinking. And a shrinking business is one that disappears, obviously. That scale and pace of growth may be different across organizations, but they do not tread water. They are not in a stable situation, and they never will be. So change is going to happen. Good change is growing, bad change is shrinking, and we have to be very aware of that. And as I said before, change is constant. It is always going to be happening. There is no stable time. There is no stable era that we can actually work to and go, oh, when things calm down, it'll be okay. No, that's not going to happen. Change is always constant. And change can be incredibly complex. And that's the areas of complexity are the ones we need to double down on. And I'm also going to be talking about like chaotic change and what that actually means. Because we can plan for change, and in the spaces of like obvious change, best practice change, maybe areas of slight complication, we can definitely plan for that change and roll out change in a nice kind of uniform manner. But we should really be preparing for the worst. We should be preparing for this sort of chaos times. And I mean that in terms of we should be putting principles and frameworks together, preparing for when things emerge. And these novel practices that we see will emerge, and we should be prepared for that. And there may be things we can't plan for. When I'm talking and using these words, I'm going to revert you to the Cynefin framework, and there's a link. I believe the PDF has been shared, so you can access this link already. And the spaces that I was talking about before, where we plan for change, are on the right-hand side. So in this obvious space where things are generally best practice. There's still change in that space. We might be looking at minor process improvement, documentation standards, but they're in the best practice zone. It's more in this obvious space, and we can prepare for that and plan for that appropriately. Also in the complicated space, where actually there's good practice. So something like an organization that's been using design sprints for a while, they're still quite complex because there's a number of people involved, and the problems they tackle are quite challenging, but it's generally just good practice, and we might want to improve that. So we want to plan those changes. We might want to increase the number of the ones that we do, or focus them slightly differently. The area on the left-hand side in this complex and chaotic space, and just be clear that chaos is not a bad terminology here. This is something that happens. We just have to be prepared for it. And this is where like emergent and novel practices are appearing. So someone that picks up a new tool and starts to use it, that could just be an emerging practice. Someone that's using like existing frameworks and tools and doing something completely different with them that's kind of revolutionary might be more in the chaotic space. And the product operations team, and therefore the people involved in change, have to just be aware of these things and be prepared for these things changing. And eventually what will happen is these novel practices become slightly more emergent, more teams start to pick them up. We start to realize whether those things should be good practice, and eventually, over a set period of time, maybe these things become best practice and become slightly more obvious. But what actually happens is the obvious can then quickly turn back into the chaotic when best practices start to be evolved and played with a little bit by the people that are in the teams, and novel practice appears again. This is the terminology that I'm going to be using throughout this talk. I want to tell you a little bit of a story. I'm not going to focus too much on the story because the story is not the important part. It's the learnings that came from it that are more important. When I joined Farfetch in 2019, obviously through a small period of onboarding, the product design director came to our small product operations team, and I say small because there was a head of product operations and then me, and I picked up a new project. And this is so important why I mentioned earlier that product operations looks at the whole product development lifecycle, because this was not a product management project of change. This was a product design project of change. Now, obviously, there's collaboration between these different functions, and the way that they cross over is also important. The design director came to me and said, we are producing high quality design work and we're going to the spec of what the product manager has devised for us. But I don't believe that our designers fully are aware of the kind of customer value that they're adding. So his objective was really to make it easier for those teams, those product design teams, and individual product designers working with product teams as well, to actually be able to showcase the value of their greater customer centricity. So how do we talk about the work that we're doing? How do we know what the business goal is, the customer goal? When do we know when to stop and launch an experiment? So the impact of this was beyond product design, but started off in that space. There's a number of things that were introduced as part of this. So we had much clearer design rituals for when we start planning work, when we review work, when we have a design team retro, so we can look back and be introspective and be on a path of continuous improvement. We had what we call starting conditions or golden questions, which was really asking very pointed questions around what is the business goal? What is the customer goal? What do we intend to do about that? What will show success? And what is the timeline that we're working with? So those questions were asked really up front. And in pockets, these questions were being asked. And again, go back to amplifying the good. But on the whole, we were just doing work and we were doing good design work. But what does good really mean if we don't understand what the customers are looking for, or even when to stop doing this work? And that's where we brought in definitions of done. So we knew what the minimum amount of design work was to actually achieve the goal. So should we launch something or should we work a bit longer and create an even better experience? We also introduced complexity levels, so we could actually talk about the various types of work that we do, which would certainly help with our design estimation. What we were seeing was that some work, when we didn't talk about complexity, a product team might think, oh, this is a relatively quick and easy thing to do, but the design team was like, this is going to take a really long time. So in introducing complexity levels allows that conversation to happen. And then introducing kind of like standard agile practice with work in progress limits. So designers really focused on what it was intended that at that time to be done. So if a work is particularly complex, only do one thing at a time. If a piece of work is kind of relatively obvious and kind of easy to manage, we've been there before, we've kind of done similar things, you might be able to pick up 2 or 3. And that could also change depending on the experiences and capabilities and seniority of designers. These are the things that we introduced. They were relatively straightforward. We were able to articulate them well, and we were able to explain the objectives of each of these things quite well. I estimated 2 to 3 months of introducing these things. To give you an idea of scale, which is where a lot of complexity comes in, we at the time had 5 customer verticals. So these were relatively siloed. We're in a different organizational structure now, but back when we did this, we had 5 verticals. We had approximately 60 product design and research people, and that's of all levels from junior to director. And we had around 50 product management and leadership level people, again, associate to VP level product people. That was the immediate effect. So we had the product design and research section was where it was going to feel the most impact of the change. Because of their close collaboration with product management, of course, they were going to feel the change and have to be involved in a lot of that change. And then the wider impact is then, around 250 of our engineering partners, our platform partners, and eventually our business partners as well. So all of them would feel the effect of this change, even though they might not have been directly involved in it. This process actually took a lot longer. So I think after around 9 months, which is 2 to 3 times longer, we realized that actually there's still a number of these changes that hadn't taken place, even though we had planned as best as we thought. and we'd actually introduced the changes in the best way that we thought. And to give you a little bit of context, before joining Farfetch, my change management experience was limited. I'd worked on small scale change, some of that more obvious best practice, good practice level stuff, which I thought this is what this was. And I'd worked with clients on change management projects as well, but it was mainly led by the client and with an advisor being myself. So actually leading and being accountable for something actually changed the landscape of what the change looked like. And what I want to talk to you about today and the rest of this talk will be on what I learned throughout that journey, and hopefully a few kind of tips and tricks. Some of it may be obvious to you because you've been through it. Some of it may be more novel to you because you've not heard of these things and you can explore a little further. The first thing I want to talk about is really setting up for success. And I know there's the old adage of failing to prepare, then prepare to fail. And that absolutely stands true. And even Taylor Swift says it here, right? Just because you made a good plan doesn't mean that's actually what's going to happen. And I know there's the Mike Tyson quote of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. But actually having that plan and having something to fall back on gives you a really strong foundation. So when things might not go correctly as you prepared or planned, you can still kind of move forward with strength and hopefully be successful. And some of the things I want to talk to you about here, and you'll see as I go through this is where a big chunk of the advice, and at least my learnings, therefore hopefully advice, was actually is actually embedded, because again, preparing up front is going to make everything go a lot smoother. Again, I'm not going to talk to specific change management frameworks. That's for you to go and investigate. I'm going to teach you about my learnings. And the big thing for me was ensuring that we connect to the big picture, but equal to that is actually understanding the current state. When I was brought onto this project, there was a clear objective and the why was quite well understood by everyone involved. The current state had been researched, but that was before my time. So probably 6 months before I joined, some of the heads of design had done a good piece of research and understanding how we worked, how different teams were operating. And I took that as being the truth, the one source of truth. But actually within that 6 months, things had changed, obviously. But I moved from that standing point, and that was definitely a mistake. I should have gone back and gone, okay, we need to re-understand this, because although the research was done well, I didn't have the full context. I hadn't spoken to everyone. I hadn't even built up a lot of those relationships with everyone. And that was definitely a failure of mine that I learned from. I want to show you a little bit of a model that is really being quite important with the change that I think about. It's called the Lippitt-Noster model. Again, there's a link in the PDF. As you can see here on the top line, if you have strong vision, which we did, you have consensus, which we mostly did, we had skills, which we did, we have incentives, we kind of did, resources and an action plan, your change is going to be successful. But as soon as you start taking some of those key kind of factors out of the equation, you all of a sudden end in an area of probably change failure. So there's only really one way of getting this right, and that's having everything in place and everything being quite strong. When I was making the change, there was probably something around incentives and consensus, which was causing some of those issues. And a lot of that was actually down to my lack of building the relationship before making the change. But you can see here, like if there is everything in place, but no vision, causes a lot of confusion. And if there is everything in place, but there's no resources to actually make the change happen, people are just going to get frustrated. This is really something important to think about, connecting to the big picture of that vision and then understanding the state of play with all these other connecting points that will hopefully prove successful. The next bit, and as I found out making this change, is that familiarity bias overcomes a lot of complexity. So there's a lot of processes and systems that were overtly complex, very idiosyncratic, very specific to individuals and individual teams. But there was almost ability to overcome that because they felt somehow subconsciously felt powerful, that they were doing the right thing because it was overly complex. It's something that you have to be really aware of, because removing some of that becomes an extra challenge. And equally then applying like a product management and product-led mindset to these things, keeping things lean, trialing with the right team that are the right focus, the ones that are slightly more energized, the ones that are leaning into the change and have been through change in the past and know what it's like. Picking those teams to trial things with is incredibly important. I did not do this. I launched all those factors I was telling you about. I launched all of them at the same time. I believe they were basic enough, which actually they were, but in launching all of them and not being lean caused quite a lot of issues. And as I said, it took 2 to 3 times longer. I did not expect it to take more than 3 months. I thought these things were basic. I wasn't ready for the level of scale and number of people, so just be aware of that. and celebrate success and plan to celebrate success. There's a balance between celebrating absolutely everything and only celebrating big things. Celebrate the things that matter and have added value, but make sure that that happens. Part of that planning is definitely about communication. This is where another big chunk comes in, and you need leaders to really communicate and be inspiring with that vision and with that goal. So planning communication up front, which is a lot of the change management frameworks we'll talk to, is incredibly important. But secondly is identifying broken links potentially ahead of time. If a particular team has their leader that is, say, out on long-term parental leave, or there's key people that aren't going to be back in the business, or they're focused on a particular project that means they can't join in, identifying those broken communication links is going to be super important in spreading the message correctly. And then showing first and documenting second. We had incredibly strong documentation. I was able to be able to articulate what we were doing. I was quite strong at, but actually showing what that meant, I failed on a little bit. And what I look back on is we should have been lean, experimented, shown the value, and then documented. And I did it the other way around. And second to that is providing incredibly clear action if you need people to do things. If there is actions that accountable people need to take, be very clear on it, but also explain what's not changing. When you introduce a large change management project or initiative, it's incredibly important to say, this is the stuff that's changing, this is the stuff that isn't, so you can be calm about that. And finally, silence can be corrosive. If you're not hearing feedback, it's incredibly challenging to know what's working and what's not. But that doesn't mean you should be the broken record and keep poking people and keep asking and keep putting meetings in to talk about it, because that also doesn't help change happen. As I mentioned earlier, actually bringing people along with this, co-creating, collaborating, is going to make the change way easier to manage. And that's not something that I was able to do at the beginning because of certain pressures that were happening in the business. But co-creation is key to adoption. As soon as people feel engaged by the change, they will make it happen with you. And identifying those accountable people, the early adopters, is very important, and those people should be elevated. There's certain people in the organization that are comfortable with ambiguity, lean into change, and they're the ones that you'll be able to identify across various levels. They could be junior people, and really make them stand out and make them an ambassador for the change. I want to also show you the grief curves. Now, this is actually related to death, but can be very easily applied to business. And if you don't bring people along on the journey, they will start off in shock, denial, frustration, and then get into depression. And depression, as you can see by the curve, is a really hard thing to pull people out of. However, if you bring them along on the journey, they start off around the kind of experimentation mode, decision-making, and finally integration. Be very aware that people can slide back down this curve as well. It's something that we all have to be aware of, not just with change management, with general business. And leading the change. So as I said before, leading by example, showing the way is incredibly important to making change happen. And sometimes that has to happen by the change leaders. So it might be product operations. And sometimes it has to happen by levels of directors, the product design director in this sense. He actually introduced me to this called the YAP triangle. There's not a lot online about this, but I have linked to something that you can read about. It's one of those classic triangles where you can only choose two things. So it's the same as the cost, quality, and time. You can only pick two. So if things have to happen by agreement with a group of people, and they have to happen now, that's time to experiment. However, if it has to happen everywhere, it has to happen now. Certain compliance procedures, for example, there's just rules that have to be put in place, and that just has to happen. So you have to choose two and decide which way to go with it. But it's about working all of these sides at different points throughout the change. Sometimes rules will have to be put in place. Sometimes it's just about discussing things, and that's good enough. But being aware of this will really help you make the decision on which way to go with things. And part of that, and particularly rules have to be put in place, and they have to be put in place now and everywhere. It sometimes takes a benevolent dictator. And when I mean this, it's the one that is the person that knows that the change is going to be good. We just need to get it over the line. We just need to make it happen. And again, with a good product operations leader, that person can be them. But it is insanely important to have air cover of leadership. And I mean like directors, VPs, C-level, depending on the size of the organization. And we call this air cover. So having that air cover, and actually I use the product design director as almost like a sock puppet, we used to call it, where I knew I was going to announce something in Slack. And I just said, either can you announce it, Or can you follow up by saying, yes, this is incredibly important, this is how you do it? Because having that leader and having that voice in the room really is very powerful, because people rally around leaders, and if they're good leaders, even more so. Preparing for change and actually preparing for change management, it's going to be a regular activity for product operations. So it's really important to hone that skill, to understand how to make change happen in the best ways. So very basic but obvious things that you can do. Go and learn more about change management. I did it the hard way by not knowing anything and then hopefully learning a lot about it. There's plenty of frameworks out there that you can go and learn. Go and ask your organizations to provide training budget to go and do this. And actually start thinking about your own change framework, either a personal one for you, one for the specifics of your organization or the change you're trying to make, but tailor it, make it personal, whether that's you or the organization you're working with. And lastly, really remember this can't be done alone. I tried to make this happen by myself, again, because of our small team. Oh, sorry, my fire alarm just went off. Embarrassing. But yeah, you can't do this alone. So make sure that you do have a small team of people to actually make this happen. I know that was an incredibly quick run through. I know there's a lot to take on board there, but again, just pushing you to my blog, ndxcc.com, there's a pretty good and lengthy article. I cover even more topics on change management. So please do go there, have a read. And yeah, if you want to talk any more about this and my experience in general in product operations, then you know where to find me. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you. And yeah, pass back to Adam if there is time for questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. What a fantastic session there, really great, very inspiring, and high praise in the chat as well. Really awesome. I love how chaos can be so positive, to be honest. That's my key takeaway. Yeah, feel free, we have a bit of time, everyone, so drop some questions into the chat. I do have some anyway from our kind of Slack community that have come through here, Chris. One of them was, what are some of the kind of key sort of performance indicators you've used perhaps in the past when working on a change project?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always find myself resorting back to my consultant days, but it really kind of depends on the change. So some of the things that we put in place for this change in particular were the starting conditions, or what we eventually started calling golden questions. I have an article on those as well if people want to read that. Having those in place, and we were coaching people through how to answer these questions, but did these questions and this understanding of the project that the designers and product managers were going to pick up, did answering those questions mean that we are adding more value to the customer at the end? And it's quite theoretical, it's quite qualitative. I think a lot of operation stuff like this is qualitative, but we're actually finding that the ones that were creating good starting conditions felt like they had a better understanding of the project they were trying to be part of, and therefore were adding more customer value. They also found that their estimations, so this is something that's a little bit more quantitative, with complexity levels and work in progress applied to design, you can start to estimate more accurately. Now, estimations is estimations, right? It's still guesswork. But in the past, we were not having that conversation. After this, we were, and those estimations were becoming more accurate, because equally we knew when to stop doing work. We actually knew that we'd done enough work on design to stop, to decide whether to keep designing or do more research, or to decide to experiment. So the number of projects that are actually going through actually increased as well. So those were just a couple of them. But that's just to give you an example, because actually I think depending on the change you're trying to enact, the measurements might be different. The one thing I would say is don't be scared about qualitative metrics. That is still incredibly important. Like, do people feel more confident in the work that they're doing? Has that increased? That's still a really great question to ask. I think a lot of the time people think about measures always being quantitative, and it doesn't have to be.
Fantastic. Thanks for that answer. We've got another one come through actually here, Chris, from Josh, and probably covered it slightly, but how do you overcome resistance to change?
Yeah, it's really good. I think I would definitely revert back to that diagram that I showed. Be prepared for it. There could be resistance to change, again, depending on the kind of scale and level. If it's in that more obvious space, you might be able to prepare a little bit better for some of that resistance. A lot of what product operations people do, and I believe the best ones, are building relationships and learning how to influence. So that is something that you really have to build your muscle in doing, and be prepared for that up front. When you're enacting change, I think a level of organizational awareness and navigation is going to be a big part of this. So who's going to be involved, and do you have that relationship with them already? Are you able to influence them right off the bat, or is it going to take a little bit of time to kind of focus on them? There may be other people you don't need to focus on too much. So I would just actually lean on your relationship building and influencing skills. One thing I would always say is, if you don't have direct influence of a person, maybe because they're quite a high level person, find the person who does and start to build that relationship, because that might be a slightly easier one. You have to also, because what you'll probably find is, as much of that planning that you do, there's going to be resistance still anyway. It's really about explaining the vision and the objective. Like, why are we doing this? Like, what's in it for them specifically? Because the broader what's in it for us, it is very often quite accepted, and getting that consensus isn't too hard. It's that incentive piece. What is it in for me individually? And you might have to break it down a little bit and really get to them and explain to them what that incentive looks like. And also, I mean, we've spoken about this throughout the talk as well. Bring them on that journey. If you know straight away, right at the beginning, before you even start a change management or a kind of initiative, that they might be resistant, get them in early, get them involved, and say, this is your change as well. Get them co-creating, and that should really help with the resistance.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Chris. Well, we're just about out of time. What I'll do is I will share some link. Oh, actually, we've got one more question coming. We'll go for it. This is, what are some tips that you would offer for any organization setting up new product ops vertical?
Yeah, identify the problems. Once you identify the problems, then you'll be able to define what kind of operations team that you might need. So if it's something around like understanding how teams operate and how efficient they are, you might need someone with data background. If it's more around coaching and consulting of like director level, you might need people with broad product development understanding. Identify those problems early and start to focus around them. See how emergent they are. Don't be drawn to the flames. Actually see if that problems are arising in various different areas, and just start doing it. Someone's already doing operations. I can guarantee you that. It's just that they won't be called product operations. They might just be called a head of product, but find out who those people are.
Nice, fantastic. Again, thank you for that, Chris. I have dropped some links into the chat, everyone. So if you want to connect with Chris, he is also obviously on LinkedIn, but he's also on our PLA Slack community as well, active in the product channel. So if you do have any further questions on this, we can get to those too. To echo kind of like Jason's sentiments in the chat, really helpful, very, very thought-provoking presentation. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.
Thanks all of you for attending. See you on the next one.